That's a lot of third-party plugins.
It's a lot of plugins. Some of these are options, but you'll see. Okay, so this is a relatively dry kit. I can go through it rather. I'll try to go through it a little quicker, but you can stop me whenever. But so the first thing, I got kind of obsessed with tape and tube emulation, and Zach, you'll see that I switched it up. This is now the universal audio version of the tape saturation plugin. I used to use the Waves one, but so this is without. That's pretty subtle, but you can already tell it's a little fatter. And then next thing is a tube emulation. That's without. And then next is, okay, so I had shown this to Zach last week, but this is, so Chris Lord-Alge, I don't know if he's a famous mixer producer, I guess. He has this series of Waves plugins, which are like kind of the ultimate and shortcut plugins. It's just combining EQ, compression, reverb, and a gate. I don't use the gate, but all into one plugin. And just, I talked about this last week, but I'm very into the absolute fastest, shortest route to something sounding good. So I'm not obsessing about, did I turn all 20 knobs for their optimal position? So this basically here, so this is without, is with. So he's kind of pre-selected 3 different frequencies EQ-wise on the top end and on the bottom end. And then you can apply a little bit of compression. You can apply some kind of a studio reverb. What is going on here? Oh, that's why.
It's sounding a bit more real.
Yeah, I think it's to me it sounds more like what you expect to hear on a record, And then the next thing is, so I've become a big fan of these kind of smart plugins that analyze your audio and sort of get you close so that you can then fine tune rather than you start EQing or compressing right from the get-go. So basically the way this works is you put it on the drum setting, you hit learn, you play audio through it. It creates this curve and you decide, do you want a lot of EQ? Or do you want just a little bit?
Looks like it decided that you didn't need much EQ.
Yeah. And then it's not smart enough to know when something is a little boomy, so I tend to roll off a little bit of the low end. So that's EQ. So then the next thing I kind of got into is, where is it? These 1176 compression plugins. This is just kind of classic compressor. So that's without.
Yeah, it really brings a lot more sustain kind of an oomph to the snare and kick.
Yeah. So that as you can, I mean, just for comparison's sake, so this is with, and this is where we started.
Yeah, it sounds.
So, and then I'll apply a little more EQ at the end just to bring out some of the high end that was lost from the compression, but that's kind of a taste thing. So then what I will do once I get to this point is I just, in this session, put some random bass and guitars down. So just to play the drums against something. Let's see. So basically, at that point, I usually decide, okay, are the drums like popping enough? And what I will do is often put a reverb in the chain before the compressor. And the reason why is because when the compressor hits the reverb tail on the snare, you just get this really nice sustain, and it just feels like the drummer's hitting the drum harder. Um, so this is like kind of a studio reverb that I just added. So this is with without. It just sounds like the guy's hitting the drums harder, and it just has more space to it. But sometimes you don't want. Sometimes that's too much. So you can also put in. This is more of a drum plate, which is a little, just kind of gives it more pop. Without. With. Or another option would be to add like a small hall, and it just gives more ambience to the drums. So I like to play around with different reverbs and decide like what's appropriate given what else is happening. So let's say for now that we're going with the drum room, which kind of gives it the most impact. So that's more or less my like basic drum sound. But if you want to get creative, you can put distortions on your drums. That's a little over the top, but it's something that's fun to mess around with. Or also sometimes if you want, also for effect, you could put a filter on the drums. Or it might be a high pass is sometimes fun. So anyway, that's more just like, are you going for an effect, Mm-hmm. But yeah, so this is the basic. Anyway, so that in a nutshell is kind of the string of plugins I put together for drums. And that kind of goes for rock drums or electronic drums. But what really changes is how much am I compressing it and which reverb I'm using.
I mean, these drums sound amazing for MIDI drums. They sound amazing, period.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
I have a couple questions. This chain is all on one drum bus. All the drums. This is just all your drums are one track. You're not mixing your individual drums at all anymore.
Used to do that, and it just takes fucking forever. Like I said, I'm all about quick.
That's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah, just like get to a good. If I can make it sound good without going to all that detailed work, then that's what I'm going to do. And and as you can see, it's like every single one, not all of them, but most of these plugins, I'm really only messing with one or two faders or knobs, which just reduce the number of choices to make. That's my motto.
Yeah.
And my second question is, so you have this chain, you set it up. I know you were demoing out some different plugins recently to maybe adjust your chain, but typically, do you have this chain and you just slap it on? How much do you actually get into each plugin and tweak it? And how much
I tweak everything. I created a group here, which is my drum group, basically, of a drum chain right here. And I drag it in, but then I tweak at least one or two knobs on every single plugin because every drum sound is going to be different. How hard the level hitting, how hard the signal is hitting the plugin changes. So but like for example, like if let's say we're talking about this compressor. So this is the main compressor on the whole drums. You know, putting up here, it's quite a bit different from here. So I kind of try to find the sweet spot.
Is input like the threshold? Is that
correct? You know, it's interesting. These old compressors, which is what this is emulating, it's the way it's designed. I believe is there is a threshold, and then you change the strength of the signal coming in to hit the threshold as hard as you want, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and then so basically I just brought up a snare preset and then I tweak the input so that, but you know, so you can see that that's kind of the sweet spot, but like if I even go just a little lower, it just loses all its oomph. Or if I go way up here, I mean, maybe that's an effect one might go for, but it's a bit much, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So finding that sweet spot is a big part of, you know, the adjustments I make.
So obviously this whole setup is for someone who's producing and mixing themselves.
Yeah.
Or, you know, because you can't really easily get the stem, you know, split out the stems of the drums and send them to a mixer or anything, you know, with this, the way you're doing
it. Right.
But can you talk a little bit about the mindset? Because even just as an individual, you have to switch between the different mindsets when you're in a creative producing, you know, songwriting, composition mindset versus mixing. At what stage do you just slap on the chain kind of immediately when you're creating, and then do the mixing later?
Yeah, it's funny. So usually I will get some drums going and then I'll move on to bass, guitar, synths, whatever. But at some point, pretty quickly, I will think, you know, these drums just aren't inspiring me. So then, and it's very gratifying to make for me to make the drum sound better. So I will go through this process until the drums sound good and think, okay, now these drums are inspiring me again to keep adding stuff. So I kind of go back and forth, I guess. But usually I mix the drums to at least somewhere around this point pretty quickly.
Let me piggyback with one last question. You're great at drums. Drums seem to be like one of your things that you are great at, and as you just said, love to do.
Yeah.
Why is that? What were your influences? What was your background? Why do you love drums so much?
That's a really good question. I think because so much music I like from the 80s to the 90s is like, to me, like the drum, like I want to feel the rhythm. You know, it's just like cool music to me means they have really cool drums. And you know, going back to like I always liked the sound of like programmed drum machines and stuff, but I also liked like Butch Vig's stuff in the night, like, you know, the drums in Nevermind or the Garbage albums. They just sound so good and they add so much kind of pop to the whole production. Yeah. So I always just felt like if you don't get the drums right, you know, then that means like so much depends on getting the drums right. That's just kind of always been my approach. Yeah. I guess because they occupy so much of the track frequency wise and dynamics wise, you know.
Right. It seems to have such an impact on whether it sounds professional or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, you know, so that's my recent obsession with this plugin chain, because it's like, if I can make it better, I'm going to try to make it better, you know?
Right. It really, I mean, because drums really do operate a huge swath of the frequency spectrum, where you compare that to guitars or something, and it's almost surprising once you get into mixing how much you cut away from something like guitars.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, I feel like in general, we do so much to make sure the drums are still felt, like sidechain compression and, you know, EQing out low end and whatnot, you know?
Yeah. You don't want people to lose the beat.
Exactly. It's rock and roll, right?
This was amazing. Thank you so much for showing.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for being interested.